Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Manning, and this is Liberty's Last Refuge. And today we're going to be talking about Donald Trump. It was just announced a couple hours ago that the Supreme Court has decided to take up Donald Trump's appeal of the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to keep him off the ballot in 2024. And this is just the primary ballot. And arguments are set now for February 8th. Now, for those of you who may not have been paying much attention to this, although I doubt it is anyone at this point, a little bit of a background story here. All right, so this nonprofit organization called CREW, the Citizens for Responsible Ethics in Washington or something like that, a leftist nonprofit organization which has pretends to be about holding all elected officials accountable for any sort of unethical behavior that they engage in, although they have a very particular slant, which is hard to not notice. Anyways, they bring this lawsuit saying that Donald Trump has engaged in insurrection. The proof for this insurrection is simply that they say so, and every Democrat and media personality saying the word insurrection over and over again over the last now 3 years. So tomorrow is actually the eve. I'm recording this on January the 5th. Tomorrow is the eve of January the 6th, 2021, where the supposed insurrection took place. It wasn't an insurrection. It was a riot. Anyways, they took this case to Colorado, and they've taken it to many other states. They have failed in every other state, but in Colorado, the Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago ruled that, yes, Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection, and therefore he is disqualified, even though there has been no charge of insurrection, even though Congress has made no such declaration. So that is where we're at now. So the court has agreed to hear it. And they're going to take up arguments have been scheduled for February the 8th. And so they are taking this on an expedited manner. I think this is a good thing because it's going to lay to rest a lot of the terrible arguments that you've been hearing from people like Lawrence Tribe and Andrew Wasserman and a bunch of other unethical and let's just say less than people with integrity. They have little to no integrity, and those are the people telling you that, yes, Donald Trump actually can be barred from running for president of the United States under the 14th Amendment. Now, many of you I know probably have not actually read the 14th Amendment, so we're going to go through it here, and what is important is going to be Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So let's go ahead and go through it in detail so that way you have an idea of what the argument is being made. The 14th Amendment, Section 3 says, no person shall be a senator or a representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president. Now, just a footnote here, Donald Trump is not running to be a senator. He is not running to be a representative of Congress, and he is not trying to be an elector for the president and vice president. As many of you know, the electors became a focal point of the 2020 election when Donald Trump tried to create his alternate slate of electors, which has led to the Georgia case and the RICO case, which will also fail in spectacular fashion at some point in the future. All right. Nor shall they hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, and this is the important part. So in order to ban you from being a senator, a representative, an elector, or holding any office, civil or military, you first need to have done this. Who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, Donald Trump was never a member of Congress, or an officer of the United States, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state. Now, Donald Trump never held any of those positions, so it's important to point out that this amendment is explicit in which offices and which people are barred. To support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may by a vote of 2/3 of each house remove such disability, being both the House of Representatives and the Senate. All right. So first, the very obvious thing is that they're on a weak, the CREW and the Democrats have a very weak case because what office do you notice is not listed under the 14th Amendment, Section 3. That would be the President of the United States. Now, the Colorado Supreme Court had to twist itself its knots and had to deny the reality, and they spent a great deal of time, several pages, trying to explain how Donald Trump is actually an officer, and that's the only way that they could find their convoluted logic that Donald Trump is excluded, because he would then fall under those exclusions of people who held this office or took this oath as an officer. Now, what is an officer of the United States? Now, this is coming from the Appointments Clause, and what it means is officers are your cabinet officials. So this is your Secretary of State, this is your Secretary of Defense, and their deputies. These are people who have been given power of the government, of the executive branch, by the President of the United States. Now, the President of the United States and the Vice President, members of Congress, and the Senate, they are not officers of the United States, and this has been clear since the early 1800s. I don't remember, one of my history classes, we were talking about the Constitution and the Appointments Clause, and I can't remember which president it was specifically, whether, but it was right around the time of Jefferson and Madison and Adams, and I believe it was Thomas Jefferson who asked Madison to give him a list of all of the individuals who would fall under the category of officer. And so when that list was given, and Victor Davis Hanson, he may know exactly who it was, but I remember this from one of my history classes I took in college. That was one of the things that was laid out and went over who were officers. And obviously the president and the vice president were left off that list. And that's because president and vice president are elected officials. They're not officers. Now, the Colorado Supreme Court spent, like I said, several pages trying to create this new legal definition of how it is that exactly the president of the United States suddenly became an officer. They will fail. The Supreme Court will ridicule them for it, more than likely, is what I anticipate in the future. Now, the last section here is the Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. That's Section 5. So what does that mean? It means in order for you to be disbarred, in essence, from being able to run, Congress has first got to pass a law saying that you have engaged in an insurrection. What Crew is arguing is that this amendment is self-implementing, meaning they can simply go and be like, what was his name, the character on The Office, and I declare bankruptcy. And that they can do the same thing for Donald Trump, and this nonprofit organization somehow has the power and authority, or even the Colorado Supreme Court, which they have no authority, to all of a sudden declare that Donald Trump did in fact engage in an insurrection when Congress has passed no bill, and not even the federal government and Jack Smith and his 91 something indictments, did he ever bring up the idea that Donald Trump had engaged in insurrection. That's not one of the charges that Donald Trump is facing. Now, you would think if it was so obvious that Donald Trump had engaged in insurrection, Jack Smith would have added that to the 91 charges that he has Donald Trump on. He didn't. Why? Because he knows that it wouldn't even come close. He couldn't even get him on an incitement, which is what the House failed on in its impeachment inquiry of him. The second impeachment inquiry was an incitement to insurrection. The Senate failed to convict. So even there, they have no grounds, because not even in the political process, rather than the evidentiary that we have beyond a shadow of doubt in a court of law when we're having this actually adjudicated, they couldn't even score that victory. So here's my prediction. The Supreme Court is going to say one of two things. Either they're going to go in detail and lay out in every way how this is wrong, how the judiciary has no business and no ability to even engage in this sort of idea that they have the ability at a state court level to declare that a federal candidate has engaged in insurrection. Again, they're going to say they have no authority. It is a political question. Therefore, the judiciary has no authority. And they're going to talk about how when the 14th Amendment was originally debated, that the office of the presidency was intentionally removed under an earlier draft. And so what that's going to show is that, in fact, that the Congress did consider the idea of making the president one of the offices that you could be banned, but then they decided that they actually thought that the people would be smart enough to make a decision and that the president of the United States was an office which would not be able to be banned under the 14th Amendment. So I think that's the route they're going to go, and they're going to say, obviously, that Donald Trump is not an officer. They will slap them in the face with the reality of 300 years of constitutional law and just civil law. I mean, nobody has ever argued that the president of the United States is an officer, and that does have a very specific legal meaning. And the president of the United States, the governor, does not fall under that. So in your state legislature, your state legislatures are not officers. Your governor is not an officer. Who are the officers? The people that are appointed by the executive to carry out the authority that the executive has, right? Those are the people who are officers, your department heads and their deputies. Those are who officers. So it should be interesting. We don't have to wait all that long. We got a month before the oral arguments. So that is my prediction. Donald Trump will get reinstated on the ballot. The Maine Secretary of State will also get slapped around a little bit by the Supreme Court. And I hope, and it is possible, that we may see a unanimous decision on this, or I could even see it being an 8-1, as Elena Kagan would be the most likely holdout. The other two justices may understand that this sort of threat to the electoral process is rather dangerous to this nation. And that's what I'm predicting, either an 8-1 or a 9-0 decision, saying that the 14th Amendment, that Donald Trump did not engage in an insurrection under the 14th Amendment, that the presidency is not an office that is even able to be banned under the 14th Amendment, nor is he an officer, and that the court doesn't even have the authority to declare such a thing at the state level court. Now, is what I predict. We'll see if that happens. All right. Well, I appreciate the two of you who watched my last podcast. I know that one was college football, so wasn't really going to be the wheelhouse that I think many of you who became subscribers joined up for after maybe you watched my sudden death video where I debunked the idea that a bunch of healthy athletes have died suddenly after getting the COVID vaccine. So once again, my name is Chris Manning. This is the Liberty's Last Refuge podcast. I would appreciate it if you liked my podcast today. If you wouldn't mind hitting that like button, maybe share it on social media. I would appreciate it. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy the weekend and merry January the 6th.